And now, staying in the Middle East, let's go in depth. Rami El Khouri writes in the Daily Star on Egypt in the light of the referendum of the country's new constitution. The piece titles, "Anthropology, Not Politics, Rules in Egypt." The new constitution was approved by an astounding and totally expected 98% approval, which accurately reflects the sentiments of those who voted. The frenzied mass support for General Sisi and against the Muslim Brotherhood is genuine and reflects a peculiar combination of Arab events and sentiments that are only found today in Egypt. Khouri suspects that what we witness these days in Egypt cannot be analyzed by using political criteria, but rather requires the tool of an anthropologist. There is no real political or ideology involved here. There is mainly biology driving events these days, primarily the anthropological need of tens of millions of Egyptians to get on with their lives, and as they see it, prevent the collapse of this society that has functioned without interruption for over 5,000 years. Khouri adds that the small majority that elected Mohamed Morsi as president in 2012, by mid-2013 a likely strong majority of those Egyptians were frightened by the combination of incompetence and autocracy that the Muslim Brotherhood practiced during its year in office and chaos in the streets at times. Rami El Khouri believes whether Sisi runs for president or not is not the main issue. More significant is whether the existing interim government and this power structure that it mirrors has the capacity to meet the needs of the Egyptians. In the past 3 years, Hosni Mubarak and the National Democratic Party, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, the Muslim Brotherhood, and now the current transitional government, installed by the armed forces again, offer very different worldviews and operating systems. Yet those 85 million citizens get up every morning and get on with their lives without seeing any massive changes in how their society is ordered or their own material condition. When they become scared, they stop acting like individuals and they move as a herd that instinctively seeks the closest waterhole or food source. Thriving can wait. Survival is the imperative today, and order is its handmaiden. Russia, Iran set stage for Geneva II, Turkey's slow turnaround on Syria. An article featured in Al Monitor looks at recent developments in the Middle East. The article reports Turkish President Abdulla Gul called for a recalibration of Turkey's Syria policies in view of the realities that have emerged on our country's southern flank, he says. Gul's charge was read as a challenge to Prime Minister Recep Tayyipp Erdogan, who was immersed in a corruption scandal while dealing with Ankara's failed regional policies. Erdogan and Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu stuck to the line that no blame for Turkey's difficulties falls on them, and that the corruption inquiry is a coup supported by international powers and interests. A second significant change, Ali Hashim reports from Tehran that Turkey is giving some priority to strengthening ties with Iran, including Ankara slowly coming around to Tehran's approach to a political solution in Syria. And third, Al Monitor reminds us US Secretary of State John Kerry last week held firm that Iran would not be invited to Geneva II and coerced and pleaded with the Syrian opposition coalition to send a delegation to the conference, which it finally agreed to do on January the 18th. The writer also observes Mohammad Javad Zarif's day in Lebanon, meeting President Michel Sleiman and Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, where there might be a willingness to consider a quiet accommodation with Saudi Arabia to allow a new Lebanese government to be formed. And fourth, Kerry rejected any diversion of the purpose of Geneva II from a political transition to counterterrorism. The trend coming out of the conference may be different than it is going in, as reported here last week. The signs are already there. Nobody at this stage really believes that Geneva II will be about Assad's negotiating himself out of office. And finally, the piece observes a fifth significant matter. The US realizes these links between Geneva II and the rising terrorist threat in the region. Even if Kerry needs to hold firm to the stated purpose of Geneva II heading into the conference, US Deputy Secretary of State William Burns told Al Monitor Kerry emphasized our concerns about the rise of violent extremist groups, the danger of spillover, the importance of success in Geneva II. And the piece concludes with Edward Dark reporting from Aleppo, even if the Islamic Front can play a role in beating back the ISIS, the Islamic Front is certainly no answer to the Syrian conflict. What is needed, as has been repeated, is a political process that ostracizes the extremists, not incorporates them into the political fabric. And today we are joined by Mr. Oğuzhan Göksel. Not only is Turkish, he is also a researcher on Turkish political and economical situation at Durham University. Welcome to the show, Göksel. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. As we look into the first part of the Al Monitor piece today on President Gul challenging Erdogan, my first question, why do you think that the Turkish president has a different opinion to what Prime Minister Erdogan has with regards to the Syrian issue?
Well, actually, this is not the first time President Gul appears to have clashed with Prime Minister Erdogan on a major political issue. Radical differences of opinion between the president and the prime minister in Turkey is not a well-kept secret in Turkish politics nowadays. These differences of opinion between President Gül and Prime Minister Erdogan first came to surface last summer during the Gezi Park protests. In his public speeches at the time, for instance, Mr. Gül appeared to adopt a much more moderate and compromising attitude towards the protesters than Mr. Erdogan, who preferred to use labels such as looters and barbarians to refer to the protesters. So, as we can see, the difference of opinion between Mr. Gül and Mr. Erdogan in terms of their understanding of the Syrian issue is simply the latest of a series of political issues in which they had differed. If you recall, Mr. Gül was the foreign minister before he was elected president, and since those days, Mr. Gül has been known to be moderate on foreign policy issues, insisting on Turkey to have good relations with its neighbors. The current Foreign Minister, Ahmet Davutoğlu, was also known for its famous zero problems policy, yet it can be argued that the Arab Spring of 2011 constituted a turning point in Turkish foreign policy, as since then Turkey had been heavily involved in domestic political crises in Egypt and Syria, to the extent of taking a clear side in the struggles for power. In Syria, for instance, the foreign policy directed by Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Davutoğlu focused on overthrowing President Bashar Assad and supporting the armed opposition with weapons, funds, and intelligence. And because Turkey had taken such a clear stance and, in matter of speaking, past the point of turning back, Mr. Erdogan must surely be feeling that if President Assad remains in office in Damascus, he may seek revenge on Turkey. And Mr. Gül, on the other hand, seems to believe that Turkey should still give chance to diplomacy rather than military means in its dealings with Syria. Thus, Mr. Gül appears to be much more willing to negotiate with the Assad regime, as well as Assad's foreign supporters such as Iran and Syria. Yet, I personally believe that Mr. Gül's stars will not prove sufficient to influence Turkish foreign policy, and the hardline attitude taken by Mr. Erdogan and Foreign Minister Davutoğlu will continue to shape Turkish approach to the Syrian civil war.
Very. And how do you think the latest corruption inquiry will reflect on the incumbent AKP and Erdogan's chances in the upcoming elections?
Yes, this is actually quite connected with the previous question, the foreign policy issue as well. At this point of time, it's very difficult to see how the corruption inquiry will reflect on the upcoming elections, to be honest. What is certain, however, is that the corruption inquiry and the following political crisis, referred as a state crisis by some foreign observers such as the European Union, has brought an end to the long coalition between the AKP, Justice and Development Party, and the influential Islamic fraternity known as the Gülen movement. Since the very first electoral victory of the AKP in 2002, the Gülen movement has been a close associate and an ally of the AKP and Mr. Erdogan himself, as the movement provided support to the government in all elections through using the vast influence of the Gülen network in media and economy. No one knows how many members the Gülen movement has for sure, as the movement doesn't keep official records about this. Yet its influence is known to be very strong in not only Turkey but also abroad, as the leader of the movement is based in Pennsylvania, United States. And the movement has a lot of influence not just in politics but also in the financial world. Lately, it's becoming apparent that the movement is trying to form political alliances with opposition parties such as the Republican People's Party and the Nationalist Action Party against the AKP. And the influential newspaper of the movement, Zaman, which is also the most popular newspaper in Turkey, has already shifted its discourse and taken a clear stance against the AKP government lately. Thus, I think it's reasonable to expect that the Turkish government, the AKP government, will lose votes in the upcoming municipal elections, due both to the high possibility that Gulen movement members will be voting to opposition parties, as well as other citizens who have no ties with the movement, yet their opinions being influenced by its media network. History tells us that Turkish citizens are very sensitive to allegations of corruption by politicians, even if they are not proven by prosecutors. And latest public opinion polls made after the corruption inquiry also support this argument, as the votes of the ruling AKP appear to have dropped from about 50% to about 42%, according to one opinion poll company, Sonar, that had been very successful in predicting the outcome of previous elections. Nonetheless, we also have to acknowledge that there's still time until the municipal elections in late March and the presidential elections in the summer. So currently it seems as the government is facing the biggest challenge it has faced since they first came to power about a decade ago. And if you ask, can Mr. Erdogan change the seeming downward trend in the AKP support? Right. Well, it's uncertain. Turkish politics has become more complex than ever. Every day we see new crises, scandals, voice records, and secret footage of some corruption or another. So it's really difficult to be certain. We shall see together.
So basically you think Mr. Erdogan is really challenged with the upcoming elections? He is in a difficult position, you think?
I think, yes, more than ever compared to the previous elections. He first of all, he has a much bigger coalition of opposition forces facing him now. He lost a very important ally, the Gulen movement. So even if he somehow changes this downward trend, I think this will be the most difficult test for the AKP that it has faced since 2002.
Augustin, also, you mentioned before that people are very sensitive now in Turkey when it comes to scandals, even when there's no verdict just yet within the courts. Is that a bit of a change in the political culture of the Turkish people, which usually do not challenge their leaders historically? They don't really take to the streets to protest and things like that. So do you see a change in the political culture of the people of Turkey when it comes to that?
I think, yes, I agree. There's recently, we can really see that there is a change of political culture. As you said, Turkish people have not been known to protest. But lately, especially after the Gezi Park protests of the summer, we see much more street protests against the government. I think this is reflecting a global trend also that have occurred after the 2008 financial crisis. And when it comes to corruption, on the other hand, even though Turkish citizens do not have a long tradition of going to street, they have a long tradition of voting against the government, on the other hand, when it comes to corruption. For instance, back in 1990s, when a number of coalition governments faced corruption charges similar to what the AKP faces today, the Turkish citizens who supported these governments didn't hesitate to go opt for other parties and basically choose a new government. So I think this may be the case in the upcoming elections as well.
Oxen, one last question. In case you have another Erdogan term in Turkey, and of course, you know, Turkey is a candidate to enter the European Union, and of course, democracy is one part that needs to be achieved, and perhaps Mr. Erdogan has seen as someone who's done a bit of improvement in that department, but not when it comes to transparency, particularly after the recent corruption inquiry. So do you think another Erdogan term will harm Turkey's aspirations to enter the EU if he wins the elections?
Well, it's become quite a complicated issue. First, Mr. Erdogan himself has repeatedly stated that he will not seek a fourth term as prime minister, and because the party program of the AKP explicitly prohibits a fourth term as prime minister. So I think what he's going to do is he's going to opt to become to be a president in the summer elections. And in the current system of Turkish constitutional parliamentary democracy, the president doesn't have much actual influence on policy making. But we also know that Mr. Erdogan is he has long wanted to turn Turkey into a presidential democracy rather than a parliamentary one. So I think no one in Ankara and Ankara politics nowadays knows what the next move of Erdogan will be. I think currently the AKP government is just busy trying to win this struggle against the Gülen movement. So I think if, for instance, Erdogan goes for the presidency, and if he fails to turn Turkey to presidential democracy, even if he's elected as president, he's not going to have much influence over the government. So I think the things for Turkish democracy and the European Union membership, they're really uncertain. I think the municipal elections in March will shape what Erdogan's next move will be, whether he will try to change the party program and seek a fourth term as prime minister or go for presidency. We'll see.
Exactly. Thank you very much for this valuable participation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was Oğuzhan Göksel, also researcher at the School of Government and International Affairs at the University of Durham.